I gotta tell you right now, I'm not wearing any pants.
All right, well that's Douglas Soltis, everybody.
Hey,
Hello.
yo.
Um, well, this is week 4 of SyrupCast, and I just want to welcome you to the first, last, and only line of defense against the worst scum of the universe. My favorite line from a Will Smith song. Oh no! I'm hearing your voice in my head again.
I believe you're contractually obligated to.
That's right, but I was actually hearing your voice in my head when you weren't talking, which means that I'm not crazy. It just means that the Hangout started playing in another window. So we are on week 4 of SyrupCast, and this week was a little bit of a mishmash compared to last week where we focused primarily on Google I/O. We had a great discussion on Google I/O. We got some good feedback from you guys. The one piece of feedback that we keep getting is your audio quality is terrible, Daniel, and you're ugly. I can do something about the first one. Unfortunately, I can't do anything about the second. So this week we're going to try something new. Please tell us if it works. This week we're also going to focus on a couple regulatory announcements. The first one being the AWS 3 auction, which was announced on Monday. And we'll get to why that's a big deal and why that could mean big things for your wallet, or rather fewer things for your wallet, if you want to go that way. We're also going to talk about the launch of Spotify in Canada, which seems to be inevitable, or rather, it seems to be coming imminent. That's the word I used in the title. Thank you. It's going to be coming soon. I've actually figured out a way to sign up for it as a Canadian, and I'll give you some hints as to how you can get there. It looks like it's a good service, and will be a nice contrast to Google Play Music and Rdio and that. And we're also going to talk about BlackBerry shutting down ScoreLoop. Now, this is their gaming service that they were trying to integrate into a bunch of their native games. Why is that a big deal? And then we're going to talk about driving while texting, or texting while driving, because most people actually do more of one than the other when you're in high school. And then we'll go into our first App Roundup. Now, this I'm excited about because we haven't really touched on apps yet. We haven't talked about what we like. And as you know, we are gamers, we are app users, we love devices, so we're going to get into that a bit later on. And then finally, we're going to talk about the LG G3 that was announced coming to Canada on August 1st, and I have a demo unit in my hand. Not right now. You can see no phones in my hand. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So Doug, what's up?
I gotta say that 4 weeks is the longest summer relationship I've ever had, so I'm feeling pretty good about this.
Have you noticed that we're Christmas today?
Oh, we are Christmas. Christmas in
Yeah.
July.
All right. Well, that's actually a good way to begin. So let's talk about the summer. The summer is usually a pretty boring time for wireless. There's really no announcements to speak of. But this week was actually quite interesting because over the weekend, Minister of Industry James Moore said that he had a big announcement for Monday morning. Now, I went to a wedding of a mutual friend, and so did you,
Yes.
on the Sunday night, and I was not looking forward to having to get up early on the Monday morning to cover this, but I did, and I wrote about how the government will be auctioning off another piece of the AWS spectrum, dubbed AWS 3, and this is a complement to what was auctioned off in 2008, which inevitably led to the creation of Wind and Mobilicity and Public Mobile, and we know that that didn't exactly go as planned, but this auction is also going to appeal to those smaller guys, but it has a few stipulations. Now, the total block is 50 megahertz, which means that they're going to be giving a few carriers an opportunity to buy blocks of spectrum in every region of the country, but they're setting aside 30 megahertz for existing operators that have less than 10% national share or less than 20% regional share in every region that they operate. So what that means is that Wind can only bid for the set-aside spectrum in Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia, whereas Videotron can only they can only purchase the spectrum in Quebec. So let's talk about that. What do you think about this? Do you think that this will lead to the competition that we all want so badly?
I don't understand the reasoning behind. I understand the reasoning behind maybe earmarking certain pieces of spectrum to allow the smaller carriers to kind of expand their coverage regionally, but I don't know why that then precludes them from auctioning for the other spectrum blocks as well, if they had that intent. It seems, I don't know if it's an example of the government maybe looking to appease, like, we have this story up where Bell said that they want a level playing field, which is the most incredible thing a carrier can say. I think maybe it's the Canadian government trying to appeal to specific interests, and I'm not sure if it's going to play out similar to the previous auction the way that anyone anticipates or is hoping for, at least in terms of actual competition.
Yeah, I think that's important to note, because the idea of actual competition is kind of the specter in Canada. We don't really know what it means yet, because some provinces do have what we consider to be real competition. Even in Ontario, in places like Thunder Bay, where T-Baytel operates, Rogers has significant discounts on their higher plans.
Shout out to T-Bay.
What's up? So, I don't know. I mean, SaskTel, MTS, these are all carriers that don't have less than 10% market share in their specific region, so they're not actually eligible to bid on the set-aside spectrum. It basically means that Mobilicity, who is on death's door, Wind, and Videotron are the only ones, and Eastlink in the east, in the Maritimes as well. But all the other new entrants, or ones that are considered regional carriers, aren't allowed to bid on this. Now, what it means, though, is that the government is trying to consolidate the smaller carriers before this auction happens, because they essentially, in order for Videotron or Quebec or Videotron's parent company to bid on the set-aside spectrum, in Ontario and British Columbia and Alberta, they actually need to operate here. They're not going to just roll out some random service and say, oh yeah, now we operate. They're going to think very hard about whether they should buy Wind or Mobilicity or both. Now that is basically what everybody's saying, that's what the government is trying to get them to do. And I think that's true. I think that it would make sense for, before this auction happens, Wind and Mobilicity to merge or be bought by Quebecor, who has repeatedly said that they want to enter new regions.
Yeah, well, so I'm not the biggest free market guy, but it seems so guided in its intentions. Like, what is, when you're limiting the amount of auction participants to such a small amount, it's not really an auction. You're literally just, it's like that eBay sale that you find out about a day late. It's like you cannot get that thing that you want at the price that you want, and pushing towards consolidation. While I feel that might be a benefit to consumers eventually, if like some sort of Wind Videotron Voltron, a video Wind Voltron takes place, there should be an opportunity for other entrants to pick up, or for SaskTel to pick up more spec. Like, there should be a more level playing field, at least in terms of possibilities, rather than having the Canadian government steer this so directly. Especially when you see the competition is happening at the lower tier, but not amongst the big three.
Well, here's the thing. So they are able to bid on the spectrum. SaskTel can bid on the spectrum. They just have to bid on the 20 megahertz that is not set aside for new entrants in each region. Now we don't know specifically, because if there's no new entrant, if there's no smaller carrier with less than 10% national or 20% regional share in those regions, then presumably there's no set-aside spectrum. So SaskTel is just then going to be bidding against Rogers, Bell, and Telus in that area, and Bell and Telus have nothing to do with Saskatchewan, so it's basically going to be SaskTel picking up half and Rogers picking up the other half, or they're dividing it into 30 and 20 for a total of 50. What we don't know yet is whether they're going to break it down into separate blocks. So what it could be is that for the 20 megahertz, the 20 megahertz that's nationally available, it's probably going to be a 2x10, which means that it's a block of paired spectrum in 10 megahertz sizes, and then for the other one, for the 30 megahertz, the government said that it's going to be a single block, which means that it'll be either 2x5 and 2x10, or 1x15, or 2x15, which is probably not going to happen, because that just makes it very difficult for the smaller entrants to divide it amongst themselves. If two of them want to bid, it's going to be very difficult. And the government wants these companies to pick up the spectrum at bargain basement prices. That's why they're setting it aside, where Wind is basically the only carrier in Ontario, British Columbia, and Alberta who is even allowed to bid on that spectrum right now. So this is it's an interesting conundrum that the government has to figure out before next year when they start this auction.
Yeah, and there might be something we're missing here in terms of procedure, where they're covering their bases and saying that they were able to control this, when really they know it's going to end up being a free-for-all if there's no opportunities for purchase. But it just kind of it smells like they're overthinking it slightly. But I guess we'll see in the run-up to the auction how each kind of carrier or potential auctioneer responds, to really know if this is going the way that the government wanted, or if it's turning into something else entirely. But it was interesting to see Bell get right out in front. It'll be also interesting to see how someone like Rogers responds.
Well, Bell always does this. Whenever there's some advantage given to the new entrants by the government, which, it has to be said, has been the government's tack for the last year or so, ever since they committed to having a fourth national carrier in every region. They need this. They have to try to come through with their mandate to provide a fourth carrier, and therefore competition. The problem is that when Wind inevitably does pick up this spectrum, they're going to have a big decision on their hands, because, okay, the spectrum is not going to be nearly as expensive as it would have been in the 700 megahertz range. So they're going to be able to buy it very cheaply, which means that, let's assume that Wind picks up at least 20 megahertz of this 30 megahertz set-aside spectrum. They're going to then use it to launch LTE. Now, what happens when Wind has LTE? How do they then come out to the market and say, okay, we now have unlimited LTE plans in Ontario, Quebec, or Ontario, British Columbia, Alberta, and then presumably when the government starts regulating domestic roaming rates, they're saying, okay, now when you're out of our home area, you can then roam on Rogers 3G, and not have a terrible experience when you're in Thunder Bay, which we don't offer service, but Rogers does. And by the way, you spend $20 a month extra, and we're going to give you unlimited 3G in those areas. That makes Wind a very compelling alternative for the first time since they came out, since Rogers, Bell, and Telus launched their respective LTE networks. This is the first time Wind would be able to come out and say, we offer the same product as you, on a national level, or at least a sort of pseudo-roaming national level, and we're going to charge half what you guys are charging. Booyah. Like, do you think that's enough for people to go and switch?
No, and I get it. And the obvious corollary is to say T-Mobile's troubles to expand. in the United States, and this is essentially where the Canadian government can come in. I like the mandate for a fourth national carrier. I also just think that if the procedure through which they try to do that also hurts the strong regional carriers that Canadians are happy with because they don't want to touch the big three or maybe a fourth national, then that's kind of disappointing. But the example that you laid out is compelling and would be useful across Canada.
Well, let's talk a little bit about my experience opening up my Rogers bill this week, because I spoke to you about this, and I have a legacy plan, and I share my account with one of my parents, and I looked at our bills, and my value pack, which is again a legacy product,
yes,
went up by $1.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents' legacy pack went up by $1.30, and I'm wondering what the hell happened, because I didn't see any indication of this. So I reached out to Rogers customer support, and they told me that it would have been in my April bill. So this is my June bill or my July bill. It would have been at the end of my April bill. I checked, and sure enough, on like page 10 of my 17-page bill, it's there saying your value packs will increase by $1 if this is in order to provide continued good service, and if you don't like it, switch to our Share Everything plan. That's basically what Rogers is saying now. We reported on the fact that for those outside, or for those on a month-to-month contract with legacy 6 gig data plans, that will increase from $30 to $35. Mm-hmm. These are all ways that Rogers is trying to say, we're going to increase your bill just enough every month, even if it's in contract, because I'm in contract. They increase my value pack by $1, even though I still have a year left on my 3-year contract. We want you to switch, and we're going to make it just annoying enough and just expensive enough that you need to switch over. That really irked me, because it doesn't matter about the extra $12 a year. It's the fact that they increased the price of my contract bill
mm-hmm.
by $1 every month without me doing anything. I didn't agree to this, but in the contract there's a clause that says they can increase the price of certain parts of your plan if they tell you about it.
Yes. So, and there's a lot of things here. First, just the basic process of the way that they went to inform you. Like, yes, they put it on your bill, they buried it there. Usually, people check the bill amount, and if there's no discrepancies there, they don't read the rest of the bill, because if it's in line with what they're paying, they just pay the bill. Second of all, in that time that they were putting information buried in your bill, how many Rogers connected emails were they sending you directly to your email address? So there's that, which is the regular kind of procedural BS, which is annoying and disappointing, and wins no favors with customers or any sort of loyalty and retention. The second thing is that the biggest misconception with carrier contracts in Canada is that the contract is in any way for the plan that you have. It's not. It's all about the device and the device subsidy. They can do whatever they want to your plan in a variety of different ways, which I think is the most disappointing thing, because most Canadians go into a contract with a carrier with the expectation that is kind of a package deal. Like, I'm signing up for this plan for 3 years, and I get this device at this subsidized price, and it's not that at all. It's the other way around. And I think it's terrible. And going back to the previous conversation that we had, that if wind becomes a more viable option, I'm more than happy to switch, and hope that they do not pursue similar tactics, because it's there's a better way than this, and the carriers that we have now at a national level don't have much of an interest in pursuing that way. And if first train out, I'm on it.
Well, that's what's so interesting is that with and this is a topic for another day, because we could talk about this for a long time, but I'm just going to say, with the share plans that got implemented with the 2-year contracts last year, a lot of what you're talking about actually happened. So when you sign a contract now, you're not actually signing a contract for the phone anymore. You are signing it for the plan.
Mm-hmm.
You're buying a phone that's been subsidized, but all you need to do if you want to leave is pay the remaining subsidy, which is different than when you and I signed contracts on 3-year terms, because we then had to pay an early termination fee and then a device early termination fee, and they were often way more than the price of the phone itself. Now you just pay back the phone price and you can leave, because the government's wireless code of conduct says that the entire amount of the device has to be paid off within 24 months. So they can't screw you. They can't charge you early termination fees that are beyond the price of the phone. The actual price of your plan has to be what's said on the contract itself. There's no hidden fees. I mean, the actual plans are way better today. They're just way more expensive as a result. So when your plan says that you're paying $60 for an unlimited talk, text, and messaging plan, and then you add 6 gigs of data for $65 that could be shared amongst 10 different accounts, that's actually what you're going to be paying. You're going to be paying $125 plus tax in whatever province that you are in, and you know that that's the price at the end of the day every month. But that's still way higher than most people, trying to nickel and dime on a 3-year contract. So, that's the terrible part.
It's not nickeling and diming when we have some of the most expensive plans in the known world. So the difference there is also just, so I get that. I get that, Canadians signing a contract today have a simpler experience. But as we discussed before on the podcast, the way that Rogers is treating legacy customers on existing contracts to get them to that place, after making the decision, okay, the government mandated a simpler, more basic solution to make plans more understandable, make the carrier more accountable to the agreement signed. For them to say, okay, well, the price for that is us to increase the cost for like a similar experience by 25%, leaves me no more excited.
No, but the thing is that they can't increase. They can't just arbitrarily increase the price during a contract now. So what they're doing is, and Rogers is not alone in this. Bell has done this as well, where they've increased the price of grandfathered plans without informing customers, or at least bearing it in their bill.
Yeah. And
we are none the wiser. I mean, it took me. I do this for a living, and it took me 2 months to realize this. Because I just, like most people, pay my Rogers bill. If I see, because I have television, I have internet, I have a bunch of phone numbers. My bill is like $1 billion a month. I don't check the minutiae. I just like, fine, Rogers, if you want my firstborn, take my firstborn. I want to use my phone. That's kind of the way that most people view their Rogers bills. And, I don't want to have to go through it every month with a fine-tooth comb to see where they're screwing me. I am an optimist. I believe that when they say that they're charging me $80 a month for my plan, that's what I'm going to be charged. And unfortunately, I can't rely on that anymore, because I'm going to have to go back next month and see, okay, well, did they increase this part of my plan? Did they increase another part? Is my brother being screwed now? Like, let's talk about this.
No one wants an itemized list of the ways in which they're getting boned over. So I think, but what you're articulating, beyond the minutia of the deals, the plans, the changes in the laws, the biggest problem with this industry in Canada is the fundamental relationship between the customer and the carrier is one of complete and utter distaste for each other. And until, no, seriously.
You're absolutely right.
These carriers would love to be able to just not deal with customers. And people in Canada, if they could have a phone in any other way and a working plan, would do it in a heartbeat. This is not the way it operates in other places in the world.
So let's
just not.
let's say we're going to earmark this as a future podcast. We're going to spend the entire podcast talking about plans versus unlocked phones, because the Moto E and the Moto G sold unlocked at a store like Staples, allows you to go to any carrier and negotiate price. I mean, let's talk about whether that's actually a viable option to save money. For now, though, we've already spent half an hour talking about this, and we're not even halfway through our news. Let's talk about Spotify. Spotify has...
Happy news.
Happy news. Let's talk about spending our money on things that we actually want to spend money on. Spotify is coming to Canada. It's launching soon. They've been recruiting testers for their service. Are you excited? Do we need Spotify now that we have Google Play Music and Rdio and Slacker and whatever other services that, like Songza, SoundCloud, things like that? Do you think people are going to flock to Spotify in 2014?
I don't know if flock's the word, but I think it makes me happy and exciting. We were just talking about this maybe 2 weeks ago in a tete-a-tete where I was, right after the Amazon Fire Phone announcement, I was just really disappointed with the current state of Canadian access to U.S. streaming services, right? So the fact that right after that, Spotify is like just on the verge of becoming available and is kind of available right now if you know how to grease the wheel. I think it's important because beyond access to say like Google Play services and things like that from a mobile perspective, Spotify is used all over the internet. Mm-hmm. It's like kind of like the default. If you're on a blog or a website and they're like putting together playlists and things like that, they're using like Spotify. It's around. It's there. So to have that kind of door opened is good. It's huge. It's hopefully. I don't know if other companies will see it and be like, oh, hey, they were able to finally get it because it took them, like 4 years, 3 years for it to happen?
Well, they said that they were coming to Canada initially in August of 2012, so it's been about 2 years.
Okay, so yes, it's just generally good news. I think people are going to use it, or they're going to give it a try because for a while now they've known about it. Canadians have known about it and not been able to try it. So I think they're going to at least play with it and see if it's something that they want to use long term.
Yeah, so I was able to, as you say, grease the wheel and figure out how to sign up. I already had a US Spotify account, so this is basically what you need to do. And I'll be doing I'll be putting together a how-to on how to do this. But you do need to sign up currently or have an existing US Spotify account, and you can go in, you can change some HTML and make it think that you are in Canada, because they're not accepting new registrants in Canada right now, but their back end is already to accept Canadian credit cards, and there's the Spotify Canada service already launched, but it just doesn't show to the end user right now. So you basically have to go in and change some HTML, and I'll show you that in a bit. But what it means is that Spotify is now the big player in in a Canadian market that's already pretty saturated with great choice. We have Rdio, which is an amazing product. I use that every day. Google Play Music is also a wonderful alternative, and it's available, built into Android. Every Android phone comes with Play Music already installed. We have Slacker, which has been around forever. We have iTunes, but not iTunes Radio. We have
Deezer.
What else do we have? We have Deezer. So yeah, that's actually a good seg. So Deezer is the biggest, or was the biggest, streaming music service in the world. They have 5 million users. Spotify has more, but for a while Deezer was the top dog. It's based out in France. It's got a great interface. It's really smooth. It's got all the features. It's got more songs than Rdio, and I think Spotify, but I think they both say that there's 30 million available. But Deezer actually just closed down their Canadian offices this week, and that's in big contrast to Spotify launching here. Even though, of course, they're not going to launch a local office, I think it speaks to the fact that it's very difficult to launch a streaming music service in Canada, especially when you rely on ads. Now, localized content is important to Canadians. We want French content. We have to have, when there's a radio component, you have to have some Canadian, 35% Canadian content. I don't know if that applies to streaming music, radio streaming, like online streaming radio, but nonetheless, Spotify said that they want to cater their service to the Canadian market, which is why they're rolling it out slowly over the next few months.
Yeah, and I think the Deezer thing demonstrates maybe how difficult it is, or the cost of negotiating these licensing deals in Canada, with the hampering of probably CRTC regulations plus just the competition, right? Like, I don't think people should take this as a sign of Deezer going anywhere. I think it's probably a sign of them looking to save some money and some hassle of having people on the ground in Canada.
Yeah.
More than anything, but let's stay positive with this. It's cool. Spotify's here, more competition, more choice. I buy vinyl albums and then download the songs digitally, so I'm not the target market for any of this because I'm old. But
yeah, you're the true Toronto hipster, though. I mean, like we reported on this a couple of weeks ago. The U.S. Yes, you are. In the U.S., the only growing segments of the music industry are streaming and vinyl. Vinyl grew by 40% year over year between mid-2013 and mid-2014 to 4 million albums sold. Like, that's not a lot compared to CDs, which are 52 million, and there were some 70 billion audio streams or 70 billion streams.
But the big thing is, so you look at the numbers this year though for any album that sold over 500,000. It's literally the long tail of music. People aren't going like, oh, I need that new Beyonce jam on vinyl. Let me go out and get that. They're buying everything else. Mm-hmm. Any piece of music that matters to them or they want to have a tangible experience with, or is presented at the front station of an Urban Outfitters, is getting bought in droves. So,
I just want to point this out. This is my favorite LP. This is Father John Misty's, what's it called? Fear Fun. It is absolutely amazing, and it's all like he's done all of this basically himself and designed it. There's an amazing lyric sheet in this. This is why people buy vinyl, because it's still not only a tactile experience in a way that the CD will never be, but the great vinyl releases are the ones that people actually take the effort to personalize and to inject some of their personality into, and to award. I mean, yeah, I got the digital downloads on this. Every vinyl comes with MP3s these days, but it's the added stuff. It's like the DVD box set equivalents,
Yeah, and so I bet you remember exactly when you purchased that and where. And no one will ever remember, like, oh yeah, I remember in 2013 I streamed that album. It was really awesome. But we're into weird SyrupCast right now. This is like SyrupCast After Dark. I would love to see some comments on the post for this podcast of how many of our readers either listen to vinyl or care about vinyl, or just like, guys, you need to cut this down. Got to stop talking about the vinyl.
Totally.
Or we could start a new vinyl podcast.
Yes.
But, we should. So post a comment and let us know. But we should keep this train moving because there's still a bit of news before we want to get to some apps. And we talked about the LG G3 last week, so I really want to hear your impressions on it now that you got a device.
Yeah. So I've been using it for a while, and I think that it's a great looking device. I think that it's way nicer than the G2. I mean,
it looks way nicer in person than the photos and the renders that we had seen.
Right.
The tangible build. It's got that prestige, high end, nice cut to it.
But
just like the lines.
What's most interesting though is that even though this isn't actually metal, it looks metal, but it also feels more metallic. The LG G2 was super slippery, so this one is not as slippery. It's a little bit bigger, but the 5.5-inch display makes up for it. I do have a few issues with this, and the main one is the screen. Now, everybody's talking about how rad the 2560 by whatever screen resolution. Basically, it's 2K, quad HD. But there's some serious sharpening, artificial sharpening happening on this that you'll see in my review. It's really unfortunate. And I'm not sure why LG's doing it. I think that they're doing it because some content is not actually optimized for the screen resolution, so they feel like they need to overcompensate with sharpening. The camera's amazing, the battery life's amazing, the actual OS is significantly better, but yeah, there's just something about that screen.
Yeah, and you were saying it was really happening a lot when, say, a menu option would pop up and then you had things in the background that were kind of weirdly aliased. I think, you know, when we were playing around with the phone while drinking at a wedding, both Ian and I were like, wow, that is a pretty screen. That looks great. And you were very firm in your stance that it had grown to frustrate you. Now, I think that's the difference between an initial first impression of a phone and long-term use, and you really get to see the character come out. But I do think that if the issues with the screen are because some of the assets aren't currently high res, and there's a bit of a friction there, that's in the long term probably a benefit for a G3 user, because it means, you know, they push themselves to that high end to kind of future-proof your phone a little bit. Because when those assets get updated, that screen's gonna look just as good. It's like the first people that buy a 4K TV. At a certain point, you're gonna accept that any if you're getting a non-HD, like not even a non-4K piece of content, if you're getting like a non-HD piece of content, it's gonna look absolutely terrible. But you know that you're buying something for the long haul. So I still thought I thought it looked great, but you've spent more time with it.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Although I don't believe that buying a 4K TV today to future-proof you for when content comes out is a good buying strategy. Instead,
no, it's actually a terrible analogy. It's changing all the time.
But I get what you're saying, because Android is changing quicker than, you know, Android, when 1080p displays came out, there were still issues with apps, and some UI elements didn't look great. I mean, the initial what was it? The HTC came out with the first 1080p phone, and I forget what it was called, but it was down in the States. And some assets didn't look great either. But this is not that. This is something else. This is LG playing around with its screen. And what happened here, and Anand Shimpi did, Anand Tech did an amazing review, and he actually did benchmarks of the screen and found that there were a bunch of issues, not only with the color gamut, but with dynamic range, with brightness, with viewing angles. This is just not LG's best screen, and that's because they're trying to pack as many pixels as they can into a tiny display, and it's a first-generation 2K display, and they got 1080p down. I mean, I actually think that the 1080p display on the G2 is far better than the 2K display on the G3.
In a robust kind of overall way? Like,
yes, in a usability way, in the sense that, like, sunlight viewability of the G3 is not that great because the backlight is just overpowered by the number of pixels. They had to lower overall brightness in order to compensate for the amount of battery that would be necessary to light all of those pixels. You know, so,
and it comes back to that theme that we've discussed before with new devices. It's, you know, the compromises and the choices that the manufacturers are willing to make to get certain features to the forefront. And this might be an example of them taking a swing on something which makes a nice first impression, and then over time becomes annoying. So, you know, I would say, you know, read Daniel's stuff on this to get a really good grasp of what the issues are, and then if you can, try to spend some hands-on time with the device before making a purchase decision, because it might be simply a matter of, like, some people don't notice, and some people, like, you know, you're certainly more finely attuned to this to see it, or it might be the certain thing where, you know, 2 weeks in you have serious buyer's remorse because the pretty screen turned out to be not so pretty.
Yeah, so I know that I'm being critical, but that's what I do. That's my job. Yeah. So I tend to be fairly positive about devices. I tend to rate them a bit higher than other sites. I don't tend to focus on those nitpicky type of things, because if a device gives me a great experience, that's what I want. I don't really need to benchmark everything to see that the Galaxy S5 is 4% faster than the HTC One M8. That's not what I do, because overall I don't believe those to be important aspects of a phone today. Every single phone is insanely fast. Most phones have great cameras, but when HTC launched the One M8 with a 4-megapixel back camera, that's something you can't forgive. That's just handicapping what is supposed to be a flagship phone. And I don't know if this is the case with the G3, but it might be. And I'm going to spend some more time with it. LG says, big disclaimer, pre-production, it's not final software, it's not final hardware. So we'll see. Maybe they've improved it for the August 1st release. So it's not that stupid to think that this is going to be one of the more exciting devices of the summer. But Doug, what is stupid? Texting while driving. That is stupid.
Yes, and this is where we go total PSA. This is the after-school special.
As two old dudes who have driver's licenses.
Yes, and who are too old to put up with other people's BS at this point.
Way too old.
The youngsters. Yeah.
Well, we are absolutely heartbroken at the research that shows that like an insane number of children between grade 10 and grade 12 drive or text while driving. Like, this is just an insane story, because like why do this? Not to yourself, but to other people.
Well, so having been that age once, I'm just disappointed that people that age are driving, just period, because they certainly don't dedicate their full attention to it, and I've certainly not experienced enough of life to recognize how quickly a lack of focus or attention or a bad decision can completely change the rest of your life. I think this is really an example of, you know, a new generation of kids who, beyond even having a phone, which was to us at the time, like I'm sure, like you, your first phone was probably post high school or at the end of high school, right?
Yeah.
So you've grown up as a human being with a brain prior to doing this everywhere. These kids are now. I have a niece who has a phone in like grade 4.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So they're growing up with this experience, and this experience related to school. So their phone and their communication is a primary concern. So when they're getting their first license, they're not even seeing a disconnect between driving a big metal death box, which is what it can be, and making sure that the IMs are going through. So it's, you know, our new premier has come out and said that this is really concerning, and I completely agree, because it does not take much to have terrible things happen.
No, and as somebody who was in a car accident last summer because an idiot was driving too fast, didn't see the traffic on the DVP slowing, and he screeched to a halt, and he crashed into the back of my car, almost totaling it. He was definitely, I don't know if he was texting, I'm not going to presume, but what he was 18 years old, driving a car that had been just like customized to the nines. Mm-hmm. And if you put a lot of money and love into a car, but you are driving way too fast on the highway and you don't slow down in time, endangering other people, including yourself. Like, he, thank God, wasn't hurt, but the entire experience just left me feeling really sad, and not for humanity or for young people, but just for the fact that we are so easily distracted in these huge death boxes, as you say. And you know, the study says that 45% of females are likely to text while driving, while 36% of males are likely to text while driving between grades 10 and 12. I mean, that's a big deal, especially because when you're in grade 10, you likely don't even have your full license yet. You have a learner's permit, which makes it even more illegal.
You're not even
potentially
supposed to
driving.
drive around with friends, I don't think. You're supposed to always be driving with someone who has a full license at
Right,
all
who has
times.
been driving for at least 8 months with a G2
Yeah.
or a full G license. So,
Most people in the GTA can't drive around the GTA because they're not allowed on certain highways. Like,
yeah.
um, but so it's yeah, and we're awesome right now because we're harshing on teenagers and talking about vinyl. So this is basically the oldest podcast of all time about mobile tech. Um,
The syrup has dried up.
but it's really serious because not only because it's not even just about a youth generation thing. I think the bigger thing is that uh, these people in cars, beyond the danger to themselves, can cause supreme danger to other people. So in terms of proactively fighting this, I'm pretty hard line, especially because if it is because older people do this too. Like I worked for BlackBerry. It's a company based upon mobile email. A lot of people were commuting back and forth and doing things on their phones that they shouldn't until we got hands-free visors, and then all that communication could be there, right? So I would say that the best way to fight this, especially for a young demographic, to break that habit or that natural tendency to prioritize the phone communication over everything else, which just happens to just include driving, is super harsh first-time charges. There's no 3 strikes for this because you should never have 3 opportunities to be distracted while driving and really ruin someone's life. So I would say like overnight, like 1 day in jail for distracted driving while texting. Like seriously, like scare them straight. Like this is way more serious than you're giving it credit to, and we will, not forget the fine, take their phone away. Prevent. Oh, here we go. The big 3 carriers would love this. Work with the carriers to throttle their data based upon their driving points.
Amazing. So we're talking about like super nanny state, like basically 1984 stuff here. Let's punish the kids by throttling their data for.
Take the phone away.
Well, that's the parents' job. But
I have 2 cats. I know nothing about parenting. This is probably a terrible idea. I just know that
it's a terrible idea. But it's actually it's one of those things that makes sense in the context of how do we prevent kids or people in general from driving and using their phones. You really can't. The $280 fine, most people aren't going to get it. I mean, most people are pretty good at looking away when they see a cop and hiding their phones, and the cops can't really see into the cars themselves.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to enforce.
So no, just going back to like the I/O news and things like this, is this where you think CarPlay and is it Android Drive? I want to say the name of their Android Auto. That these solutions that provide enough functionality so you don't need to be looking at your phone, and that they're much more voice-based, will maybe cut this off the pass by eliminating the need or the itch to be checking the phone.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. I think most of these are like CarPlay and Android Auto, in addition to things like Ford Sync and a bunch of existing solutions, are very voice-oriented, and I think they do a decent job. You can say Next Track or Call Mom or whatever you want, and they usually work fairly well. The issue is that if you're driving, these solutions want to do everything on your behalf. So they want to auto-respond to your incoming texts or calls. They want to read out your emails or your texts to you while you're driving. Things like that I don't know if people have grown accustomed to yet. Even if you're alone in a car, the idea of having your text read out to you is not a prospect that I think a lot of people actually embrace. So it's a matter of changing it's a matter of overcoming FOMO, or fear of missing out. It's a matter of putting your phone away. If you want to hear your text messages read to you because you need to know what's going on right this second, that's great. But the next thing you do is put it away, turn it off, and just don't use it. That's what I'm saying. But if you have to use your phone in the car, at least make sure that you have some sort of app that or driving setting, at least, that's going to be compatible with these future services like Android Auto or CarPlay. So yeah, let's move away from that. You mentioned BlackBerry. You mentioned working for BlackBerry, one of your biggest criticisms this week was BlackBerry's announcement that it was shutting down ScoreLoop on December 1st. Tell us about ScoreLoop. What is it, and why is it a bad idea that they're shutting it down?
So ScoreLoop was another one of another acquisition that BlackBerry made to, as it was trying to grow to be that all-encompassing Apple, Google, Microsoft consumer company, to plug gaps in its support system to provide useful consumer services. So ScoreLoop was a company that provided basically a platform for developers who developed games to kind of like plug and play certain tools in there that they wouldn't have to build themselves. Things like scoreboards and things like that that could easily be implemented and work cross-platform, I believe. It was not a hugely expensive acquisition, but it was an acquisition that I think had the best of intentions and didn't really end up going anywhere. And we're seeing now, I think it just demonstrates how dramatic of a shift and a change in course BlackBerry has undertaken in even 2 years. Where in 2012 I think this was 2012 that they acquired them. Well, even say 3 years ago, this was something that they were buying to ramp up to provide services for their big BlackBerry 10 launch, because consumers were going to need this stuff and the games were going to be great. And actually, the gaming group at BlackBerry did a hell of a lot of work to make it really simple to get good games on there. And now they just don't need it, because they're switching. They're not only are they moving away from consumer development and most development in general. They don't need these platforms and tools, because they're just going to put Android games in.
So wait, are you just being like an old grump and just being like, well, in my day, BlackBerry wouldn't have done this, but like realistically, they didn't.
No, I
don't
did
need it.
So that the preface to that I should have started with is it totally makes sense, and it's in line with all the decisions they've been making recently in this shift away. But I think it's there's a lot of skeletons in the closet that kind of need to be cleared out, or things on the books that no longer make any sense that need to be shuttered. Like, as you know, just even with the Amazon announcement, you also saw that Google was going to be BlackBerry was going to be closing their music and video services, and we're working with 7 Digital, who I believe is the company who provided that stuff, to make that stuff still available. So I think this is them. It's never, for major companies undertaking a major strategic shift, it's never a clean break. So you're seeing, this is the leftovers of those decisions. So I think it totally makes sense. The company the guys that got sold, they got paid. It's just, what might have been.
Right. That's totally fair. But what it says, it's no different than Google shutting down Google Reader, or Yahoo shutting down not Zobni, or one of those little used services that they acquired a few years ago that has run its course. They've integrated the staff into the company itself, and we're now left with those.
Oh, I don't think they've integrated the staff. There was like 25 guys in Germany that they bought for $60 million. I don't think that any of them are working
at
there.
BlackBerry. Well, they've laid off 5,000 people at least. So if they, that makes sense. They've streamlined the company's operations. They've moved a lot of them out of Waterloo. They are now basically a company based out of New York and Silicon Valley. And as you said, like that's a move that they needed to make. ScoreLoop was just one more weight bearing, holding them back from being an enterprise company launching the BlackBerry Passport for enterprise users later this year.
And I don't even know if it's a weight or it's just a cost. They're trying to cut every single cost possible, right? So yeah, it makes sense, and it just what might have been. It's like looking at old photos of you and your first girlfriend from high school or something like that.
But she was so pretty, but now she's married to a senator.
There was so much potential. Yeah. Okay, let's. There's you did a really, really, really great kind of review slash first impression of Android Wear that everyone should read because not only because you laid out some really great impressions and kind of set the context for what Android Wear is versus what it could be. I think you really helped clarify some of the information around what actually Android Wear can do, because there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of expectations of what a OS dedicated to wearables will be, and I think you really showed, in 2014 right now what that is for Android. So do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I'm not going to spend too long on it. The biggest thing that I've taken away from Android Wear is that it's not a finished product. And I think that's what people have to take away from the review. The current hardware doesn't feel finished. The Gear Live is basically a Gear Neo or a Gear 2 Neo with a different button. That's not a good thing. I don't think that this was this form factor was not made with Android Wear in mind. The G-Watch is basically a technology demo. It's an ugly, square, black screen, and it just doesn't feel comfortable. It's too thick. It isn't pretty, but it does have some amazing watch faces, whereas the Gear Live just has ugly ones. More than anything, though, and I don't think that this is me saying wait for the Moto 360, because I fear that while the 360 itself will be far more attractive and look more like a traditional watch with a round face and some improved watch faces and things like that.
So pretty. So pretty.
It is very pretty. I liked it, and I've seen it and I've worn it. It's really nice. But Android Wear, it's missing a lot of things that even Pebble has to its advantage. For example, you cannot review notifications. I love that about Pebble. And yes, of course, this is tied to Android. So you dismiss a notification on Android, it goes away on your Android Wear watch, and vice versa. But I don't necessarily want that. I want to be able to review the important notifications that I've seen. The second and more important thing is that it doesn't allow you to filter important notifications. You either ban the notifications of an entire app or you let everything through. That is not what I want on my wrist. I want to see my texts from Doug, but not from Bill. I don't care about Bill. Screw Bill.
In a staggered notification system, it's kind of keeping you less informed because you're just deciding, I have to make a choice. Do I want all or nothing? So now instead of pulling out your phone to check to see what the notifications for, you're either getting nothing to your wrist, so way to spend $250, or you're getting everything to your wrist, and there's no technical benefit there yet.
Exactly. There's no advantage to having that screen on your wrist anyway. Google Now is very interesting, and it shows you important information sometimes, but more often than not, it shows me the score of a Blue Jays game rather than the transit directions of a streetcar that I'm waiting at right now. If I'm waiting for a streetcar and I want to know when it's coming, I want that information right now. I don't want to have to pull up my phone to look up that transit information and then have it pushed to my watch, because then that's useless to me.
Yeah. It should be hard-coded into Android Wear that if you're standing at a transit stop and you're checking your wrist for the time, you're looking to see when the streetcar is coming. Right. So with this experience, though, and maybe you can talk a bit about also just even the difference between Google Apps and third-party apps, because I know people have started. There are Android Wear apps out there from third-party people, and just the way that they're approaching things seems a little interesting. But the expectation is with this kind of unfinished platform that these things are coming. It's not like Google doesn't know that this needs to happen. This is just SDK 1.0, right?
Absolutely. And just like any early platform, there are some bugs to work out and some features that are incomplete. Look at the App Store back in 2008. It was sparsely populated, if at all. The Android market back when it launched was similarly terrible, and the app quality was awful. The way that Android Wear approaches apps is that existing developers can augment their current smartphone and tablet apps with Android Wear functionality. So it's not difficult to make a great Android Wear app. The problem is that there's no such thing as a great Android Wear app yet, because most of it relies on voice, or at least the information is so lightly, it's not dense enough. So you don't find out nearly as much information as you should. So for example, a weather app will show you, today's weather and perhaps the next couple of days. That's interesting, but it's not super useful. The best apps are the ones that send you information in short snippets when you need to know it. Like when there's a one football Brazil app by a popular soccer startup that basically runs a Premier League app. So what they've done is they've launched a new app for the World Cup, and that will send you information on the latest goals scored, fouls, anything like that. That's really interesting, but that's a very specific scenario that not everybody's going to want. So Google has to figure out, and developers also have to figure out, do they want to develop full apps for people's wrists, or is it something that they'll just use in order to make better their current Android apps? I don't know, because it's too difficult right now to access the apps themselves. It's buried in some menu, and mostly what you're getting are cards pushed to you by Google or third-party apps, but few of the cards are useful enough to justify keeping on your wrist at all times. So,
so just with that, it seems like you can have. It sounds like the ceiling is too low on Android Wear right now, where that even a great Android Wear app actually isn't a great app.
Right. There's no such thing as a great Android Wear app because the platform doesn't know how to treat apps yet. There are 3 different ways that developers can interact with users' wrists, and they haven't figured out the best ways to do that yet. So it's a work in progress. I think that Android Wear is interesting. I don't think that it's extremely useful right now. The hardware is not there yet. I don't recommend buying a watch until the Moto 360 comes out. So if you have a watch on your wrist,
right? Because we still don't know the final information on the 360, but it definitely seems like the most compelling experience or opportunity for you to have something really cool on your wrist. And just going back to it, because we've talked before about Android or Google being like really hard line about curating the Android Wear experience, so as to kind of create, taking lessons learned from the Android rollout and really locking down what can be modified. But we've already seen, we've had some conversations on Twitter with just people are trying to root this thing, customize it, make changes, and we both say that we agree that there should be one Android Wear experience.
Yeah, I have a big issue with people customizing Android Wear because Google is trying to keep it so locked down. But at the same time, the fact that you can fast boot OEM unlock these watches the way you can a Nexus device means that clearly it's based on Android. It's open source. It's always not the code itself, but the SDK is available to developers. But the watches are tinkerable. They're not as open as a Nexus device, but Google didn't lock it down the way that carriers often lock down devices. So clearly they're not against rooting and running custom ROMs on these watches. I just think that there's no point because Google has such a constricting experience. There's no real benefit right now, at least, or I don't believe ever there will be a benefit to these custom ROMs on a watch. Why go through that hassle? It just sounds like a terrible, onerous experience.
Because there's someone right now who's trying to satisfy the lifelong dream of having like a Dick Tracy skin on their Android Wear, and that's why they're gonna. Because Android is the platform for people who like to fiddle. I feel, in my super biased opinion, I just think that when it's coming to like super lockdown, dedicated use case of like what's the one thing I want to be seeing on my wrist right now, those micro engagements that are highly contextual and always useful, that's not something that you tinker with.
Well, especially since the watch relies so heavily on the phone itself. If you have a phone with custom software talking to a wristwatch with custom software, then you have the potential for your watch to crash. Mm-hmm. I never want my watch to crash. At the very least, my watch should always be able to tell the time. And I just think that it's to nobody's benefit.
The idea of that in a form of like it's taken 2,000 years for us to get the technology to crash our watches. It's amazing. But okay, so let's move on. Let's move on to some apps that are ready right now that we saw in the past week that were interesting or worth talking about.
Yes. So this is we want to talk about apps because everybody uses them and everybody loves them, and we want to focus on some great apps in a showcase. So what have you been using this week? What piqued your fancy?
Well, actually in a really this is kind of weird. The app that I used the most this week was probably Twitter, simply because we were talking about the World Cup before. It's one of the best ways to experience the World Cup, other than the amazing job that the CBC has done with their digital broadcasting and with NBA free agency. I feel like I've spent more time reading tweets about sporty things and talking to people about that than anything else. Just the level of conversation going on. So that's actually the app that I use the most. The app that I'm most maybe excited for, we wrote about yesterday, Minecraft Pocket Edition just got a major update. Just stuffed with so much more Minecraft. And this is interesting not only because we've talked about gaming and mobile gaming before and the difficulties that developers have on the app stores with exposure, trying to find monetize their game design, issues with competitors coming in, palette swapping a popular design and making more money than them. And then Minecraft just comes in, drops down in Android and iOS versions, and then they make over $21 million in sales as of April, just from the mobile versions.
And those aren't even complete, right? Like those aren't the same versions as the ones you find on the
not even. So the major update that came yesterday came this week, whenever you're listening to this, added a lot of stuff that is broadly available in the PC realm. New locations, different types of blocks, things like that. New tools for doing your own building. Wolves. Hey, wolves. So, and actually, if you look at the release information for both versions, they actually consider Minecraft Pocket Edition to be a 0.9 release. It's not even a 1.0. It's not even Minecraft 1.0. And it's made them $21 million in sales.
Yeah.
But it's because it's a known brand with a really addictive user base that's just chocked with fun stuff. And I think it's worth, if you haven't really got into Minecraft or you haven't really tried it, I'm not sure if starting with the mobile experience is great, but if you're a mobile person, if that's how you get your game on, give it a try. It might be the gateway drug into just mining all the things.
Well, to that end, or to that point rather, I went to a restaurant a few days ago, and a family came in. It was about 6 people.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like 2 moms bringing their 2 kids each to dinner, and all 4 of them had tablets in front of them. All 4 children, and every single child was playing Minecraft. It was unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it.
And it's just building their brains. I don't even think they see it as a game. I think it's like their other, they're in the meat space, but it's their blocky matrix.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's super easy to create something unique, and they share ideas off one another. And now, this new update comes with infinite worlds, caves, wolves, loads of flowers. I mean, like, these are blocks, and you have to pretend basically what they are. But the potential here for creativity is so huge, and I love that kids play this game. I love so much that they're spending their time playing this rather than some mindless shooter. Even though there is value to that, I don't think that you're engaging your creative side as much when you're playing Call of Duty as when you're playing something like Minecraft. So
if they're gonna burn through their retinas just staring at a screen all day like we do, let it be for something that instills some sort of sense of creativity and exploration. It's really interesting too, because you look at Minecraft is essentially digital Legos, it's the digital Lego MMO. And you contrast that to the still popular and highly successful Lego games, which are fun and cute and licensed IP platformers essentially, but don't capture what it is that's so cool about Legos, which is like building a world and then like just constructing this really cool thing and then destroying it.
Yeah.
So yes, Minecraft Pocket Edition. It's really cool. Great for kids.
Available for iOS and unless they're driving. Yes. Available for iOS and Android.
Yes, for
$6, $7.
Yeah, it's you're actually paying money for this game, but I think pretty much every Minecraft user would tell you that it's worth it. And it's also I can't remember the term, but if you buy it for any Android device, it's available for all. So if you happen to have a tablet as well, I see a lot of kids just going to town to Minecraft on the tablet.
Yeah, I mean that's par for the course these days. So Minecraft, that's a great choice. My choice is free and it's multi-platform. It's called Sunrise Calendar. Now I'm obsessed with keeping organized, and Sunrise has become my go-to calendar. It's beautiful. It's really functional. It recently came out for Android. I'd used it on iOS earlier. It also recently came out for the web. So there's a Chrome extension and there's a a responsive web app at sunrise.am. And it hooks into your existing calendars. So you can use Google, you can use iCloud, you can use Exchange, I believe. There's great search functionality. And it's also social, so it can plug into Twitter, Facebook, Productive if you want to use your existing task manager with it. It can plug into LinkedIn to find out more information about your upcoming meetings, who you're going to be working with, talking to. It can automatically dial into conferences, things like that. I mean, it's pretty standard social calendar features, but other than the newly released Up To and AnyDo's Cal, Sunrise is basically the best free social calendar that supports every platform, at least the major two mobile platforms and the web. And it's beautiful and it's ad-free. I don't know how they're going to monetize it, but it's a startup right now, and that's my go-to calendar on iOS and Android. Download it and give it a try.
So I gave everyone a game, and you gave them a calendar.
Yeah, I'm the boring one of the two of us, so that's okay. I'm fine. I'm ugly and I'm boring, but at least my audio quality is better this year, or this week rather. Hopefully. All right. Well, we're up to about an hour and 15 minutes, I think. So if you are still here, thank you for sticking around. This has been a great, I hope, episode of SyrupCast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to thank Doug Soltis, my partner in crime, and we will see you next week.
Shout out to T-Bay.
Yes, thanks for watching, everybody in Thunder Bay. Hope the weather is as good up there as it is in Toronto this morning. Have a great Friday, everybody. See you later.